The man never said a word when he walked in. He just stood there, soaking wet snow crusted on his sleeves, and Hood holding out a credit card and a worn driver's license that looked like it had been bent in half at some point. I remember the sound his boots made on the tile, more like a scrape than a step. Behind him, the wind blew hard against the lobby windows, and a snowplow passed by without slowing down. It was just after 9:00 p.m., and I'd been getting ready to lock up early. He never removed his hood. Let me know where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever had a house guest or roommate who made you uneasy for reasons you couldn't quite explain. And if these stories keep you company at night, feel free to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. My name's Dana Ellis. Back then, I was 37 and working full-time at a mountain lodge just outside Estes Park, Colorado. It was the kind of job people imagined was peaceful fireplaces, pine trees, crisp air. In reality, winters were brutal, and we were lucky to get 5 guests a week after New Year's. I handled front desk and guest services for the swing shift, 1:30 p.m. to 10 Huziers, which meant I saw the check-ins, the lockouts, and sometimes the strange drifters who'd wander in from the snow looking for something warmer than their car. Len Turner worked overnight. He'd been there longer than anyone, and we mostly passed each other in the narrow staff hallway between shifts. Quiet guy, kind, dependable. This was late January of 2006, just after a string of storms that had knocked out the smaller access roads. We had fewer guests than usual, just 3 rooms occupied that week, and most of them were long haulers, snowed in, or working construction nearby. The lodge itself was tucked halfway up a canyon backed by dense pine and aspen, with only one road coming in from the highway. If you missed our turn, the next chance to double back was nearly 6 miles down a steep pass. The night the quiet man checked in the forecast had warned of another system rolling in after dark. I remember debating whether to close early and just hang a sign for late arrivals, but I stayed mostly out of habit and ended up being the one who handed him his key card. Room 112 downstairs at the end of the east hallway. He gave no name when I greeted him, just slid his ID and card across the desk with both hands. I scanned them automatically. The name was normal, something like William Hale, though I'm not sure I ever really believed that was it. He had one of those faces that didn't stick. Average build, average height, skin pale from the cold with no real age markers. Could have been 35 or 50. He signed the check-in form with a slight tremor in his hand and pointed once at the board where I'd written the breakfast hours in dry erase marker. I nodded, even though I already knew he wouldn't be there in the morning. People like him never were. He took his key and walked off without another glance. I watched him go, watched the automatic doors close behind him without registering any movement. I don't know why, but I had the immediate sense that something about him was wrong. Off in a way I couldn't name. Not dangerous exactly, but off. You work the desk long enough, you get a feel for the ones who've lived too much life. The next day, I noticed his room hadn't been entered. Housekeeping said the door was still double-latched when they tried around noon. That wasn't unusual. Some guests preferred no contact. But he hadn't touched the breakfast bar either. I checked the log around 2:00 p.m. The room's entry code hadn't been used since the evening before. Still, we let it be. That night, Len came in just before 10, like always, shaking off the cold and carrying his oversized thermos. He was halfway into his usual nod when he paused. eyes flicking toward the security monitor over the desk. "Did 112 go out?" he asked. I glanced up at the screen. It was grainy, black and white, one of those old setups with four-way splits and barely any contrast. The camera facing the back stairwell had just clicked on. A figure was moving slowly toward the emergency exit door. It was too blurry to make out a face, but the walk was unmistakably him. "I didn't see him come up," I said. "Maybe he used the other stairs." Len just hummed that thoughtful sound he made when he didn't buy something but didn't want to argue. The rest of the night passed without issue. When I came in the next day, there was a note in the log from Len. Said the emergency door had been cracked open around 4 a.m., but the alarms hadn't tripped. He'd checked it himself, locked it, and chalked it up to wind. I wanted to believe him, but the forecast had shown dead calm. By the third night, it started getting under my skin. 112 still hadn't left his room as far as the system could tell. No card activity, no calls. The room hadn't even triggered the motion lights in the hallway. We were trained not to bother guests without a reason, but something about the silence was beginning to itch. Len offered to check on him when he did his rounds that evening. At 3:18 a.m., Len called the desk from the house phone near the laundry room. His voice was lower than usual. Careful. "You up?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "What's going on?" "Room 112's door is open," he said. "Not all the way, just cracked. No light inside." I hesitated. "You knock?" "No, not yet." I could hear the hesitation in his breathing. "I think maybe you should see this." I pulled on my coat and met him by the stairwell. The hallway was quiet, that unnatural quiet you get in places with thick carpet and bad heating. 112's door was indeed slightly open, just enough to see the darkness beyond. Len gestured for me to go first. I knocked gently, called out. No answer. I pushed the door wider. Inside, it was pitch black. The curtains were still drawn, the lamp by the bed unplugged, but the room was spotless. No luggage, no shoes, no coat on the hook. The bed was made not neatly, but with a kind of deliberate care that didn't match the way we usually found guest rooms. The sheets were smoothed, the comforter pulled tight, and in the center of the bed, perfectly placed, was the room keycard and a folded hand towel. Len flipped the switch by the bathroom and exhaled when nothing jumped out at us. The bathroom was empty, towels folded, mirror wiped clean, not even a toothbrush in the holder. "He was here," I said. Len nodded once, but not anymore. We left the room untouched and marked it for inspection. I checked the system again. No activity on his card since check-in. No Wi-Fi use. No breakfast. No checkout. His ID and credit card were both legitimate, but the number on file had already been disconnected by the time we tried it. That room stayed empty for the rest of the week. Housekeeping avoided it. Said something about it not feeling right. The guest's name stayed in the books for 30 days before management purged it. They said he must have left in the night and didn't want to be found. Sometimes I still think about how quiet it was when he walked in. No small talk, no hesitation. Just a man with nowhere else to go, choosing a storm-covered lodge to vanish into. We never saw him leave. And the strangest part, there were footprints leading out the emergency exit door, but none leading in. I don't usually talk about this. It's one of those memories that settles in the back of your head like a bad smell, hard to explain and harder to forget, especially when you were the one in charge when it happened. Back in 2019, I was the overnight manager at a third-party warehouse in Allentown. We handled offloaded freight for a few retailers, mostly pallets of appliances, bulk packaged food, and seasonal overstock. It was a quiet enough job if you didn't mind the hours, and I didn't. I'd worked that shift for almost 7 years, preferred the stillness of it. No traffic, no meetings. Just forklifts humming under sodium lights and the occasional hiss of cold air coming in through the dock doors. We operated a crew of 5 on overnights. 4 if you didn't count the kid we'd just hired, Wesley. Came in through a temp agency. Tall guy, maybe 25 or so, but hard to place. Always wore this faded gray hoodie under his reflective vest even when it was 90 degrees inside. Said it was for comfort. He had these pale green eyes and a way of standing too still, like he was always trying to make himself smaller without really hiding. The first few nights he was quiet, didn't complain, didn't joke around, just did what he was told. That should have been a red flag, but we needed bodies, and quiet meant less friction. He didn't even have a phone on him most nights, said he didn't want the distraction. I only started paying closer attention after I found him sitting in the dark break room at 4:15. One morning not eating or drinking anything, just staring at the old vending machine like it was talking to him. He didn't even blink when I came in. Said he'd been listening. The warehouse itself was massive, one of those old converted spaces with a high ceiling and concrete flooring that echoed even soft footsteps. The lights were motion-triggered in sections, so if someone wandered off toward the back storage without activating the sensors, they'd be in total darkness. We all learned quick to keep flashlights on us. That night, maybe 4 days after Wesley started, one of the guys Ronnie mentioned something odd. Said he'd seen Wesley walking the back aisle near Bay 12 around 2:00 a.m., but the motion lights never came on. He was just standing there, Ronnie told me, between the shrink wrap and the pallet jack, not moving. I only saw him 'cause my headlamp caught the reflector on his vest. I asked Wesley about it during our shift end review. He just shrugged and said he'd been getting air. That part didn't sit right. Bay 12 was sealed, no vents, no outside access. It always smelled like cardboard and dust, but I let it go. 2 nights later, I was doing rounds walking the side corridors to log equipment checks and past the stairwell by the employee locker rooms. The building had 3 floors, but only the first was in use. Upper levels were supposed to be locked storage overflow that hadn't been touched in years. But the door to the stairwell was open just a crack, enough to see a faint green glow coming from the top landing, the kind of glow you get from a running monitor. I stood there for a second, unsure if I was imagining it before calling up the hallway for anyone inside. No response. I opened the door slowly, the hinge groaning in a way that echoed too loud for how quiet the place was. The light vanished almost immediately, like someone had pulled a plug. I went up 2 flights, flashlight in hand, but found nothing, just old shelves, disused racks, and some broken pallets. Still, the air felt different. Not cold exactly, but thinner, like walking into a room that had been closed for a long time. The next morning, I pulled the camera logs from that section, but the feed for that stairwell had been glitching. Blank screen from 12:40 a.m. to 3:17. That happened sometimes, especially with the older wiring, but I'd never seen that particular camera go down. It got worse the following week. Pallets were getting rearranged in the middle of the night. Not stolen, not tampered with, just moved, shifted a few feet, or spun 180 degrees. Our RFID scanners showed the tags hadn't been rescanned and the cameras never caught the movement. Ronnie swore someone had been breathing behind him in the back aisle while he was running a barcode sweep, but no one was there when he turned around. I started checking the building myself each night after lunch. I'd walk the upper hallway, hit every exit door, peek into every side room. I told myself it was just inventory mistakes or the heat messing with people. But every time I passed the stairwell, I got that same strange pressure in my ears, like when you're descending on an airplane. Just enough to make me pause. The night everything broke open, I came in early. I wanted to audit the overnight logs from the previous 3 days. I'd found a sticky note left on my desk that morning that simply said, "He sees better in the dark." No initials, no context. At first, I thought it was someone's dumb joke, maybe something from the break room whiteboard, but no one admitted to writing it. It didn't match anyone's handwriting from our crew logs, and when I asked Wesley, he stared at me too long before saying, "You should throw that away." Then he smiled just for a second, but the kind of smile that made my stomach go cold. Around 2:20 a.m., a pallet fell near Bay 12. Hard, loud enough to shake dust loose from the ventilation grates. We all ran over. Nothing appeared broken, but the pallet had tipped on its side in a way that didn't make sense. Weight distributed evenly, straps still tight. There was no one in that aisle. Or so I thought. A few minutes later, I was in the office reviewing camera footage. Right at 2:18 a.m., you could see Wesley walk into frame, stand behind the pallet for exactly 1 minute, and then disappear. I don't mean he walked out of frame, I mean the video blinked and he was gone. No cut, no time gap. Just a flicker, and he wasn't there anymore. I rewound it again and again. Same thing. Then I checked the time log. The motion sensors hadn't picked him up in that section, but I'd just seen him. I called Officer Brewster, one of the regulars who handled calls in our district. Told him I didn't know what I was reporting yet, just that something was off, and I wanted a walkthrough done. He showed up around 3:30, did a slow pass through the floor, made some small talk, then came back, looking mildly puzzled. "Guy in the hoodies. Your new hire, right?" he asked. "Wesley." "Yeah. Why?" He didn't say a word to me. Just stared when I passed him near the old stairwell. "You sure he's all right?" I didn't have an answer. When I went back to look for Wesley, he was gone. His vest was hanging on the peg in the break room. His time card was still on the punch clock, never checked out. We searched the building. Every stairwell, every closet, even the utility crawl space. Nothing. The next day, the agency said they had no record of a Wesley assigned to us. No application, no paycheck on file. Just a notation that the candidate never completed his onboarding paperwork. The cameras still glitch near Bay 12. And every so often when I'm walking the floor past the old stairwell, I'll feel that pressure again. Sometimes I swear I can see the faint glow of a monitor up on the second landing, just for a second, just enough to register before it disappears again. But I don't go up there anymore. Not since the night I found a sticky note under the break room table in the same strange handwriting as the first. This one just said, "He remembers who noticed." And this time, My name was written at the bottom. I used to think staying alone by the ocean would be peaceful. Quiet mornings with coffee on the porch, falling asleep to the sound of waves, time to clear my head. It didn't turn out that way. In early 2022, I booked a last-minute stay in a beach town south of Charleston. I'd hit a rough patch, burnt out from client work, second-guessing every decision I'd made over the past year. I needed somewhere off the map, someplace with no expectations. The Airbnb listing showed a whitewashed bungalow with seagrass in the yard and faded blue shutters. The host's name was Ruth. The photos made it look like the kind of place you'd inherit from a grandmother you barely knew. When I arrived, the tide was just starting to recede, and the porch smelled like salt and rotting driftwood. It wasn't quite as charming in person. Paint flaked off the rails. The kitchen floor creaked in a way that made my teeth clench, and none of the windows locked quite right. But the place was clean, and Miss Ruth had left a little welcome note in loopy cursive. Enjoy your stay. Please don't use the back door after dark. Key inside sugar jar. I remember standing in the kitchen that first evening with the light low, listening to the hum of the fridge and the distant wash of waves. I hadn't seen another person since I pulled off the main road. The nearest gas station was 2 miles inland, and the only other house on the block looked long abandoned, overgrown fence, yellowed curtains drawn shut. The first night passed quietly. I read until after midnight, then fell asleep with the window cracked open, just enough to hear the ocean. Around 3:00 a.m., I woke to a soft clatter from the kitchen, just one quick sound like something metal shifting. I stayed still for a few seconds, thinking maybe it was the fridge kicking on or the wind rattling the back door. But the air had changed. It had that stillness you only feel when someone else is nearby, standing just out of view. I got up and walked out into the hallway. The kitchen light was off. The sugar jar sat on the counter, its lid tilted slightly to the side. I hadn't touched it since I arrived. I closed it gently and checked the back door. The knob was cold and turned too easily. I locked it and turned the deadbolt. The next morning, I called Miss Ruth. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice scratchy with sleep. I asked if anyone else had access to the house. She was quiet for a second, then said, "No, just her." Said the door must have shifted from the humidity. "It sticks sometimes," she told me. "Don't worry, nothing's out there." But that wasn't the only thing that bothered me. When I walked out to the porch with my coffee, I noticed something in the sand just beyond the steps. Footprints. Just one set bare foot leading around the side of the house and stopping near the back bedroom window, the one I'd slept in. No prints leading away. I stood there for a long time, not sure if I should follow them or pretend I hadn't seen anything at all. In the end, I just erased them with my foot and went back inside. That afternoon, I drove inland to the little gas station with the faded red roof. I needed batteries for the smoke detector, which had started chirping. The clerk was older, maybe in his 70s, and spoke with that low coastal drawl that makes every sentence sound like a warning. When I gave him the address of the house, he raised his eyebrows. "Miss Ruth's place?" he asked. I nodded. He rang up the batteries without looking at me. "Y'all keep the porch light on," he said. "Folks wander sometimes after the storm season, not all of 'em right in the head." I didn't ask what he meant. That night I kept every light on. I triple-checked the locks and dragged the old bookshelf from the living room in front of the back door. It felt ridiculous, but the feeling in my chest wouldn't let up. Around 2:40 a.m., I heard footsteps on the porch, slow, deliberate, wood creaking under each step. I didn't move. I just sat on the floor of the bedroom with the lights off and waited. The steps moved toward the front door, paused, then circled around to the side. The boards groaned once more, then silence. The next morning I found the sugar jar open again. The lid was sitting neatly beside it this time, like someone had set it down very carefully. I packed my bag, texted Miss Ruth that I'd be leaving early, and drove back to Charleston to find a motel. She didn't respond until later that evening. Her message said only, "Did you touch the back bedroom closet? Please let me know." That part hadn't even crossed my mind. I hadn't opened that closet once. The next day, the gas station clerk called the sheriff for a welfare check after I stopped in again and mentioned the footprints. When they went out to check the house, the back door was wide open. No sign of forced entry, just a faint indentation in the hallway carpet near the closet like someone had stood there for a very long time. The sugar jar was missing. Miss Ruth took the listing down a week later. When I asked why, she just said the locks had never really worked the way they were supposed to, and that sometimes people came back to places they never should have stayed in to begin with. I still don't know if she meant the intruder or me. Back in 2004, I was 16 and still living with my parents in the suburbs outside Denver. We were in a cul-de-sac at the edge of a new development, quiet, unfinished, and just far enough from the highway to feel cut off after dark. That summer, most of the houses on our street were still under construction. The lot across from us was a bare concrete slab surrounded by rebar, and further down the block, you'd see wood frames that looked like skeletal versions of homes. During the day, there was the constant hum of nail guns and saws, but after sundown, the whole neighborhood went quiet. No traffic, no street lights on the outer edges, just the occasional porch light and the sound of sprinklers clicking on around 10. It was around that time I started noticing the van. It showed up once or twice a week, always just after midnight. Always parked near the edge of the unfinished cul-de-sac, facing away from the houses. It was a full-size cargo van, white, no windows on the back, no logo on the side. I only noticed it at first because it blocked my usual view from the upstairs window. I used to sit there sometimes with the lights off, just watching the moon hit the framework of the empty houses across the street. It helped me sleep. The van never moved while I watched it. Just sat there, engine off, lights off. Sometimes it stayed for 20 minutes. Sometimes longer. Then it would drive off slowly without ever turning on its headlights until it reached the corner. I didn't say anything for a while. I wasn't supposed to be up that late, and I figured it might belong to one of the construction crews or someone staying nearby. But something about it started to bother me, how deliberate it was. The way it always parked in the exact same spot, how it never idled or flashed brake lights. One night in early July, I decided to go downstairs and see if I could get a better look. I crept out to the kitchen and peeked through the front blinds. The van was there again, perfectly centered at the curve of the road. I couldn't see into the cab from that distance, but the cabin light was on, and for a moment I thought I saw movement, just a silhouette leaning forward, as if staring at something on the dashboard. I waited maybe 5 minutes, heart in my throat, half expecting someone to get out. But nothing happened. Then the light went off. A few seconds later, the engine turned over and the van rolled away without ever turning on its headlights. The next morning I mentioned it to my dad casually, like I'd noticed it on my way back from the bathroom. He said he hadn't seen anything, but promised to keep an eye out. Nothing came of it for a few nights. The van didn't return. Then one night it came earlier. It was around 10:45. My parents were still watching TV in the living room, and I'd just gone up to my room to finish a take-home quiz. I stood to stretch and glanced out the window. There it was again, already parked, engine off, just sitting there like it had always been there. But this time the back doors were slightly open. Just a crack. That was new. I stared at it for maybe 10 minutes. No one got out. The doors never moved, but I had this tightening in my chest like I was being watched in return. I stepped away from the window. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, my dad called the non-emergency line and left a message. Said a suspicious vehicle kept showing up near the construction site and asked if they could have a cruiser swing by. We didn't hear back. That Friday, the van came again, this time closer. Not at the far edge of the cul-de-sac, but just 2 houses down from ours, parked in front of a driveway that hadn't been paved yet. I was watching from my window again. This time, something was different. There was no cabin light, no sound. But I could see something inside, a glow faint and flickering, like an old TV or a portable screen. And then I saw it. A face, just barely lit, blank expression, eyes forward. It didn't look like the driver was looking at anything, just waiting. I backed away from the window. I stood in the hallway for a while, unsure if I should wake my parents. When I finally got the courage to check again, the van was gone. I barely left the house that weekend. I kept the blinds closed. I stayed off the front porch. Monday came, and I hoped maybe it was over. But Monday night I woke up to the sound of tires on gravel. It was 2:13 a.m. I remember that clearly because I looked at the digital clock on my desk. I pulled the curtain back just an inch. The van was parked directly in front of our house. This time, one of the back doors was all the way open. The interior was pitch black. I couldn't see anyone inside. I stepped back, heart pounding. I was about to wake my dad when the front doorbell rang. One single chime. I froze. We didn't get visitors, not at that hour. My parents must have heard it too, because I heard movement downstairs. My dad opened the door halfway, leaned out, then closed it again. A minute later, I heard him on the phone with someone. The police came about 20 minutes after that. By then, the van was gone. Sergeant Williams knocked gently and asked to speak with my dad. They talked quietly on the porch for a while. I watched from the stairs. Eventually, my dad came back inside and locked the door. He never told me everything the officer said, but I caught one part of the conversation when my mom asked who it was. Somebody they've been tracking since last year, he said. Never caught him. He parks, watches, then leaves. Always quiet, always late, doesn't talk, doesn't break in, just watches. That was the last time we saw the van. The neighborhood filled out over the next 2 years. More houses, more lights, more people. But sometimes late at night I still think about the sound of those tires crunching slowly over gravel, the shape of the open door facing our house, and the man who never stepped out. He didn't have to. He already knew who we were. I've never liked waking up in unfamiliar rooms. There's a moment just before your mind catches up to your surroundings when everything feels off. I woke up like that in early spring in a beach town that should have been peaceful, but wasn't. Something about the room felt wrong, though nothing had been moved, and the silence felt rehearsed. That was the first night I started locking the door from the inside. But by then, it had already been opened. I was staying in a guest house rental off a quiet stretch of the Carolina coast, just past the weathered seafood shack and a church that hadn't had new paint since the early 90s. The woman who owned the place, Miss Ruth, was friendly enough when she met me out front. Late 60s, sharp as a tack, wore a denim jacket, and had one of those soft southern voices that made you feel like you were intruding if you didn't stop to chat. She handed me the key on a seashell lanyard and told me to watch the wind at night. It carries more than just the sand. I thought she was being poetic. The house itself was older wood-paneled one-story with a screened-in porch that rattled when the breeze picked up. I was there for a short design project, something remote and quiet, to help me finish a brochure series for a client back in Asheville. I'd chosen the place for the solitude, but there were moments when the quiet pressed in too close. I'd hear the porch creak when no one was out there, or the soft scuff of sand brushing against the glass even when the wind had died down. At first, I chalked it up to the house settling, or maybe birds nesting in the rafters. It was the third night when things shifted. I'd gotten back from the gas station just after 10. The attendant, a man maybe in his 40s with a cracked Eagles mug and too many wind chimes hanging over the register, asked if I was staying in the Ruth place. When I told him yes, he gave a strange half nod and said, "Just don't leave anything open." I thought he meant the screen door. I asked what he meant. He didn't answer. That night I fell asleep on the pull-out couch in the main room windows, cracked slightly to let the sea air in. I woke around 3:20 a.m., sweating though it wasn't hot. There was a low sound like someone whispering behind drywall. Not words, just a sound that suggested presence. I sat up and looked around the room. The porch light was still on, swaying gently. But there was something else, the smell of aftershave. Cheap, sharp, and definitely not mine. I checked the door. It was still locked. Nothing looked moved. I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it had clung to me from the gas station or a product in my bag. Still, I started locking the interior bolt from that night forward, even during the day. The following evening, I stayed up late working. Around midnight, I took a break and stepped out onto the porch. It was breezy, salt in the air, the moon cut in half and hanging just over the tree line. That's when I saw it. A man maybe 40 feet back in the sand just beyond the porch light. He wasn't moving, just standing, no flashlight, no phone. Hands by his sides. I couldn't make out his face, but I could see he wore jeans and a dark windbreaker. I called out, thinking maybe he was lost. No response. Just silence and the wind barely stirring his sleeves. When I stepped off the porch and moved toward the edge of the yard, he turned. Not in a startle, not in fear, just turned slow and deliberate and walked back into the dune grass without a word. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the lights on and the blinds closed. I told Miss Ruth about it the next morning. She frowned real slow and said, "Sometimes they come back because they never left right." I asked what that meant. She just shook her head and told me to start leaving a light on in the guest bathroom. I didn't ask why. The last night I packed up early. I had a feeling. I don't know how else to explain it. Something in the air felt thick, like walking into a room where someone had been arguing moments before. I'd locked the door, slid a chair in front of it, and turned off all the lights except the one in the guest bathroom. Just like she said. I woke again around 3:00 a.m., heart hammering. This time the door was cracked open, the chair pushed slightly to the side. Not fully moved, just nudged as if someone had tested it. I sat up, frozen. That same smell was there. Not strong, but fresh, like it had just entered the room with the air. I called the local police that morning before I left. A deputy came out, took a statement. Walked around, didn't find anything. No prints in the sand, no sign of forced entry. He said the door was old. It might have come loose in the wind. When I asked about people in the area, particularly someone who might have been lingering near the dunes, he got quiet. Then he said Miss Ruth's had renters leave early before, but they never talk about it after. I didn't either. Not until now. I grew up in a town where nothing ever seemed to happen until something did. You never notice how empty a place can feel until you're walking through it after hours when the lights are off, the music's gone, and all the painted smiles start to feel wrong. In 2007, I was a senior in high school working weekends at the state fairgrounds just outside Wichita. My two best friends, Charlie and Denny, had convinced me to help them run one of those knock-down-the-bottle booths during the summer carnival stretch. It wasn't glamorous work, but the pay was easy, and we got to wander the grounds once the gates closed and the crowds thinned out. That part was my favorite, just walking through the echo of noise, eating leftover funnel cake, and talking about girls we'd never actually ask out. It was on one of those late nights around 1 a.m. when we first noticed it, or rather, we didn't. Not until the next morning, when Denny was flipping through the disposable camera we'd been passing around that night. Most of the photos were junk. A blurry shot of a stuffed tiger hanging crooked on the prize wall. Charlie pretending to fall into the dunk tank. One of me with half my face lit by a floodlight mid-chew on a corn dog. But wedged between those shots was one that none of us remembered taking. It was the three of us standing in front of the tilt-a-whirl, arms slung over each other's shoulders. But over Denny's left shoulder, just behind the fence, stood someone else. A figure in full clown makeup, white face, exaggerated black brows, red lips curved in a wide smile, and a dusty yellow wig. He wasn't posing. He wasn't even facing the camera fully. He was just there, staring off to the side, like he'd wandered into frame by mistake. We laughed at first, said it must have been one of the performers messing around. But Charlie pointed out something that made the mood shift. That photo had to be taken after closing, after the last rides had shut down and the lights had dimmed to half power. That was the one stretch when all costumed workers were required to change out of their outfits. They had rules about that sort of thing. Liability stuff. We all knew it. And besides, none of us remembered seeing him. Not then, not in real time. That night I felt unsettled for reasons I couldn't quite name. As we walked the grounds again, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that same face, watching from behind a ride or standing by the ticket shack. But everything looked normal, quiet, a little too quiet. Charlie dared me to walk past the mirror maze by myself, which I did, though I didn't enjoy it. The reflections were warped and dark, and for a second I thought I saw a smear of white and red flicker past one of the panels. I didn't say anything, probably just a trick of the glass. Things started to feel off after that. Little things. One morning, Denny found a lollipop on the front seat of his truck, the kind they handed out at the clown tent for the kids. He thought it was just a prank. 2 nights later, Charlie's booth had its curtain ropes cut clean through, like someone had sliced them with a knife. Mine was fine, but I started noticing that the lights near my station flickered more than the others. I chalked it up to bad wiring. The fairgrounds were old, but it felt deliberate, like someone wanted to mess with us, but only a little, just enough to get noticed. What really got to me was the photo booth girl, Ava. She worked the south end of the fair alone most nights, running that black and white strip printer that spat out 4 little poses in a vertical row. I didn't know her well, but she was always nice to us, smiling even when she was tired. One evening she flagged me down as I was walking past, said someone had come by after hours and taken a set of photos. She only noticed because she was counting film usage and saw 1 extra slip printed well after closing. We both looked at the strip, 3 blank frames, and in the last one, barely lit by the booth's dying flash, was a sliver of a face, chalk-white skin, black ringed eyes, and just the corner of a mouth stretched into that same wide, unnatural grin. The angle was wrong, like he was crawling into the shot sideways, like he wasn't supposed to be there at all. We reported it to Officer Delgado, one of the overnight patrol guys who occasionally stopped by for free coffee. He didn't take it seriously at first, thought maybe it was a prank or some weird art kid trying to be edgy. But when Ava showed him the timestamp, 1:42 a.m., well past when anyone should have been on the grounds, he stopped smiling. Said he'd review the security tapes, though he warned us the system was old and patchy. 3 days later, he called us in. The footage was strange. It showed me Charlie and Denny walking through the fairgrounds, passing by the midway, the booths, the snack stands. Normal stuff, but behind us, always a few steps back, sometimes partially hidden, was the clown. Not walking, not moving on camera, just there, frame by frame, like a shadow stuck in a slideshow. In one clip, you could see him in the glass of the funhouse mirror just after we walked by. In another, he was standing motionless beside the cotton candy cart, watching us through the window as we laughed about something we couldn't remember. The thing that made my stomach turn was how none of us ever looked at him. Not once. He was right there in the shot, feet away. And we never reacted, not even a glance. Delgado said there were no official reports of missing uniforms, no hired clown matching that makeup, no fingerprints at Ava's booth, no trace of him at all. But he also said we weren't the first ones. A few years back, a different group of teens, part-time fair workers like us, had complained about a man in costume showing up after hours. They called him the Echo because he never appeared in person, only in reflections or recordings. Always behind you, never ahead. Charlie quit the next day. Denny lasted another week before he stopped showing up. I stayed until the end of the summer, mostly out of stubbornness, maybe pride. I told myself if I didn't acknowledge it, it couldn't get to me. The last night I worked, I walked the fairgrounds alone. I took a photo with one of those coin-operated booths near the exit gate. Just for the memory. 4 quick flashes. 1 tired face. That was it, or so I thought. I still have that strip. It sits in the back of my desk drawer untouched but not forgotten. The first 3 frames are normal. Just me, unsmiling, bleary-eyed, lit by a dying fluorescent bulb. But in the 4th frame, I'm not alone. He's there again. Same smeared paint, same blank stare, this time closer, almost touching my shoulder. I used to spend most of my time on the road, hopping between warehouses, coordinating shipments, and trying to get a few hours of sleep in whatever low-budget motel was closest to the next job. Back in 2015, I stayed at a place called the Canyon Pines, just outside Sonora. It was one of those independent, no-frills places, with beige siding, brittle towels, and a check-in desk behind scratched plexiglass. Nothing fancy, but it had a vending machine that worked, and a hot shower which was enough for me most weeks. I stayed there maybe 5 or 6 times that year, always in different rooms, depending on what was available. But I remember this one visit more clearly than the rest, not because of the room I was in, but because of the one next door. It was early November, already dark by the time I pulled in. I'd had a long day trying to track down a missing load of hydraulic cylinders, and by the time I made it to the motel, I was too tired to eat. The man at the desk, Tony, I think his name was, gave me a key to room 211, second floor toward the back, where the parking lot meets the trees. The place was maybe half full, and everything felt quiet in that overly insulated way motels do once night falls. But as I reached the top of the stairs, I noticed the door to room 209 just to the left of mine was cracked open about 2 inches. There was no light coming from inside, just that sliver of darkness framed by yellow hallway glow. I paused, thinking maybe someone had forgotten to pull it shut all the way, or maybe housekeeping had been distracted. But when I leaned a little closer, I heard what sounded like faint rustling, the soft kind of movement you associate with someone folding clothes or slowly changing position on a bed. It was enough to make me hesitate, but not enough to feel like anything was truly wrong. I went into my room, locked the door, and tried to ignore it. That door stayed cracked open the whole night. Every time I stepped out, whether to grab a soda or smoke a quick cigarette out front, I glanced back at 209. Still ajar, still dark, still quiet aside from those occasional subtle shifts in the air, like someone repositioning themselves just out of view. I didn't sleep much that night, not because of the door exactly, but because of the quiet, the kind of silence that isn't relaxing but dense and pressing, like something was waiting for a cue that never came. The next morning when I checked out, I mentioned the open door to Tony. I didn't make a big deal out of it, just said, "Hey, room 209 might need checking." The door was cracked all night. He nodded without looking up from the reservation book and muttered, "She does that." I asked if he meant the housekeeper, but he just said, "Nah, the lady in 209. Been here a while. Pays in cash, doesn't like to talk." That stuck with me. Not the cash, not the silence, just the word lady. I hadn't seen her. No sign of bags, no sound of a voice or TV, no smell of perfume or food, just movement in the dark and a door left open wide enough to suggest you could walk in if you wanted to. I stayed there again 3 weeks later, just before Thanksgiving. This time, I got 208 directly on the other side of her room. As soon as I parked, I noticed the same thing, the door to 209 cracked open just slightly. I walked slower going past it, but still saw nothing. I listened, but there was no sound at all. That night I had a dream, one of those where you know you're in your bed but can't move. In it, the door between 208 and 209 slowly creaked open, even though there wasn't one in real life. A shape leaned in something just slightly taller than me watching, not coming closer, not speaking, just observing. In the morning, I didn't mention it. I didn't even look at 209 when I left. The last time I stayed at the Canyon Pines was in late January. I was supposed to be passing through for just one night, but a delay in Sacramento meant I had to stay longer. When I checked in, Tony looked more tired than usual. I asked him if 209 was still occupied, and this time he looked up. "She's still here," he said. "Room gets cleaned, but she always comes back." I asked what he meant, but he just handed me the key. I got room 210 that time directly across from hers. That night, when I went to grab something from the vending machine, I noticed the door wasn't just cracked open. It was slightly wider than usual, maybe 4 inches, and this time there was a glow inside. Not a lamp or overhead light, something bluish like the glow from a phone screen. But it didn't flicker or shift. It just stayed steady, cold, and still. I watched it for a moment, then turned away. At around 2:15 a.m., I woke up to a sound I couldn't place at first, the quiet scrape of carpet like someone dragging a hand or foot just beyond the door. I sat up in bed and held still, barely breathing. The noise moved down the hall, paused outside my door, then kept going. When I finally stood and looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. But the door to 209 was open wider than I'd ever seen it. The inside still looked dark, but the glow was gone. The next morning, I went to check out early. I didn't see Tony. A woman I'd never seen before was behind the desk. I asked about the guest in 209, and she frowned. "That room's been locked up since December," she said. "We had a situation, someone passed away in there a while back. Tony should have told you. I left without asking anything else. I didn't want to know the details. I didn't want to know what date, what name, what reason they'd given. All I remember is that for weeks afterward, anytime I stayed at a different motel, I found myself watching the door next to mine, checking the gap, listening for movement, waiting for that soft scrape in the hall when the rest of the world had gone still. I've thought a lot about the places we pass through, the rooms we borrow for a night or two, the stretches of road we forget until something strange happens there. Each story I've shared tonight came from moments like that, moments where something felt just slightly off. Not loud, not dramatic, just wrong in a way that made it hard to breathe. It's not the events themselves that stay with you, but the quiet details around them. The flicker in a hallway, the stranger who seems to know your name, the sound of movement when there should be silence. Those are the things that come back in the small hours of the night, not as memories exactly, but as questions. Things we still don't have answers for. Maybe we're not supposed to. Maybe some places just hold something in them, something old or unfinished or waiting. And maybe all we can do is pass through quietly without waking it up. Thank you for staying with me through to the very end. If these stories stayed with you, I hope you'll follow the channel, share this with someone who enjoys a quiet, eerie tale before bed, and subscribe for more nights like this. And tell me, have you ever stayed somewhere that felt wrong, in a way you couldn't explain? Good night and sleep well.